Welcome back to the Gamer's Garden and welcome to another cult classic. Now, it's late 97 and 1 year into his appointment, Bernie Stolar has declared the Saturn is not our future at Sega's E3 presentation. Western development all but ceases as games get cancelled or shift to different platforms, but before the Saturn answers its final curtain call, a flourish of quality games will slowly trickle from Japan over the following year. This episode of Cult Classics looks at one of these games, Steep Slope Sliders, and its even lesser known pseudo-sequel on the PlayStation. Previous console generations relied on exclusives far more than their modern counterparts. They would fight head to head and were generally considered the best in their genre. With the explosion of new types of games in the 5th generation, this competition spread across all genres, and another cross-console battle for the bragging rights appeared in the increasingly popular snowboarding subgenre. Snowboarding games hit mainstream success thanks largely to UEP Systems' Cool Borders games on the PlayStation. Cool Borders 2 built a huge fanbase in early '98, and Nintendo were deep into development of their own 1080 snowboarding when Sega published an entry into the genre by Victor Interactive and Cave, famous for their excellent shooter ports. Even with the Saturn approaching its end, Steep Slope Sliders received a big marketing push, particularly in Europe with heavy promotion in the legendary Sega Saturn magazine, and Capcom also released the game on the STV arcade board, mirroring the dual arcade Saturn releases of other STV games like Athlete Kings and Die Hard Arcade. Steep Slope plays with smooth controls and animations and a simple trick system that just combines single flips and spins with 4 different grab moves for each snowboarder. The shoulder buttons and the D-pad are used in tandem to turn and shift your boarder's weight, and this feels particularly good when using the Saturn 3D control pad. At first, the handful of courses available feels quite empty, but multiple playthroughs reveal the opportunities for new lines and tricks, and each course has a set of records that, if topped, unlock new content, much of which feels very much like material left on the cutting room floor. The cutting room floor comes to mind again when considering the frankly bizarre feature set on offer in this game. It's as if normal thinking like a career mode or a tournament mode or even a 2-player mode simply went out the window and every other idea was used instead. Steep Slope includes full support for the Saturn 3D pad, a clock system that changes the time of day in-game, a full replay editor with a save function, a nod towards Cave's heritage with an unlockable shooter minigame, 8 unlockable characters, some of which make no sense at all, and 4 unlockable courses that feel like experimental and half-finished ideas. It all feels very nicely strange, kind of like the Pandora's Box unlockables in Panzer Dragoon 2. There was something satisfyingly rough and unhinged about many Saturn games, and Steep Slope Sliders is a great example of the esoteric nature of the console. The production values are great overall for the Saturn. How the camera twists and turns of your boarder is incredibly satisfying and works perfectly with a robust game engine that creates a generous draw distance and an attractive skybox that pitches with the camera to create an excellent sense of weight and speed. One small touch I particularly enjoy is where you can turn off the heads-up display altogether and just enjoy the scenery. The PAL release wasn't optimised, which is a shame, so the game runs much slower in this region, and the much derided dithering effect is used instead of transparencies, and this is an effect of Saturn aesthetics that age has not been kind to. The generally high production values are topped off with an excellent soundtrack and sound effects. The eccentric range of music covers breakbeat, alt-rock and vocal ballads, and they all carry a distinctly mid-90s arcade feel. Taken as an offbeat and experimental arcade-style game, Steep Slope Sliders has aged very well and fills its own niche in the Saturn library. It's light on content overall, but has a distinct identity that provided gamers with something quite different to Cool Borders and 1080. Like many Saturn games, it's an example of Sega not pursuing gamers' new tastes of wanting longer gameplay experiences like many PlayStation games offered. And Cave would have the chance to address this with a follow-up game, Trick N Snwboarder, published in 1999 by Capcom as a PlayStation 1 exclusive. This looks and feels very similar to Steep Slope and really is a sequel in all but name. The core concept builds on the replay mode from Steep Slope, with a full scenario mode spun out from this, which puts the player character as a young pro snowboarder who's hired onto a team to perform tricks and compete in competitions as part of the snowboarding film series. From here, the content on offer is far more traditional of the time, with a basic character creation tool, upgradable stats, a 2-player mode and far more courses overall. The graphics are an improvement with more solid looking characters and more trackside detail in general, but the draw distance is much closer than on the Saturn, and the soundtrack isn't anywhere near as interesting. This feels much more like a generic extreme sports game that was already quite common on the PS1 by '99. The crazy range of extras is also gone, but it does have some of its own quirks by including Leon, Claire and a zombie cop from Capcom's Resident Evil 2 as unlockable characters. Cave would complete a snowboarding trilogy with Snowboard Heaven, a Japanese exclusive PS2 game that wasn't well received, and that's really all I could find out about it. Steep Slope Sliders would be Cave's last game for Sega, before developing on PlayStation formats for about the next decade, and the snowboarding subgenre would eventually reach peak success on the 6th gen of consoles with the SSX and Amped series, before entering a deep lull that it hasn't really come out of yet. So, is Trick and Snowboarder the game Steep Slope Sliders should have been in the first place on the Saturn? I don't think so. Trick and Snowboarder was an effort to appeal to a mainstream PlayStation audience that failed to create its own identity in the process. Steep Slope was an experimental and dreamy game that felt at home on the Saturn. It's hugely satisfying to play in a very experimental way, and it's the kind of middleware title that had the Saturn produced far more of, far earlier in its life, gaming history might have played out a bit differently. So there it is, maybe Steep Slope Sliders wouldn't have changed the world no matter when it was released, but let me know what you think of the game in the comments. Check out the rest of the Gamers Garden, and until next time, happy gaming.